Hello everyone, hi YouTube, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Today we'll be finishing up please excuse me, the 10th chapter titled Cities of the Gods and Zecharia Sitchin's The 12th Planet. Last time we were reading, we left off at the little page marking point at the bottom half of the screen here. It would be unrealistic to assume that the first 7 cities of the gods were established haphazardly. These gods, who were capable of space travel, located the first settlements in accordance with a definite plan, servicing a vital need to be able to land on Earth and to leave Earth for their own planet. What was the master plan? As we searched for an answer, we asked ourselves the question: what is the origin of Earth's astronomical and astrological symbol? A circle bisected by a right-angled cross, the symbol we use to signify target. The symbol goes back to the origins of astronomy and astrology in Sumer and is identical with the Egyptian hieroglyphic sign for place. And that's the little marking down here at the bottom of the page is what Sitchin is talking about, being Earth's signet. Is this coincidence or significant evidence? Did the Nephilim land on Earth by superimposing on its image or map some kind of target? The Nephilim were strangers to Earth. As they scanned its surface from space, they must have paid special attention to the mountains and mountain ranges. These could present hazards during landings and takeoffs, but they could also serve as navigational landmarks. If the Nephilim, as they hovered over the Indian Ocean, looked toward the land between the rivers which they had selected for their earliest colonizing efforts, one landmark stood out unchallenged: Mount Ararat, an extinct volcanic massif. Ararat dominates the Armenian Plateau, where the present-day borders of Turkey, Iran, and Soviet Armenia meet. It rises on the eastern and northern sides to some 3,000 feet above sea level, and on the northwestern side to 5,000 feet. The whole massif is some 25 miles in diameter, a towering dome sticking out from the surface of Earth. Other features make it stand out not only from the horizon, but also from high in the skies. First, it is located almost midway between two lakes, Lake Van and Lake Sevan. Second, two peaks rise from high massif: Little Ararat, which is 12,900 feet, and Great Ararat, which is 17,000 feet, well over 5 kilometers. No other mountains rival the solitary heights of the two peaks, which are permanently snow-covered. They are like two shining beacons between the two lakes that in daylight act as giant reflectors. We have reason to believe that the Nephilim selected their landing site by coordinating a north-south meridian with an unmistakable landmark and a convenient river location. North of, north of Mesopotamia, the easily identifiable twin-peaked Ararat would have been the obvious landmark. A meridian drawn through the center of the twin-peaked Ararat bisected the Euphrates. That was the target. The site selected for the spaceport in figures 130 on the next page. Could one easily land and take off there? The answer was yes. The selected site lay in a plain. The mountain ranges surrounding Mesopotamia were a substantial distance away. The highest ones to the east, northeast, and north would not interfere with a space shuttle gliding in from the southeast. Was the place accessible? Could astronauts and materials be brought there without too much difficulty? Again, the answer was yes. The site could be reached overland and via the Euphrates River by waterborne craft. And one more crucial question: was there a nearby source of energy or fuel for light and power? The answer was an emphatic yes. The bend in the Euphrates River where Sapar was to be established was one of the richest known sources in antiquity of surface bitumens, petroleum products that seeped up through natural wells and could be collected from the surface without any deep digging or drilling. We can imagine Enlil surrounded by his lieutenants at the spacecraft's command post, drawing the cross within a circle on the map. What shall we call the place? He may have asked. Why not Sapar? Someone might have suggested. In Near Eastern languages, the name means bird. Sapar was the place where eagles would come to nest. So, on the page that we had just finished just before this one, they're talking about the north and south trajectories in between these mountains and rivers and make it easier for them to traverse and do what they need to do, coming and going. How would the space shuttles glide down to Sapar? We can visualize one of the space navigators pointing out the best route. On the left, they had the Euphrates and the mountainous plateau west of it. On the right, the Tigris and the Zagros range east of it. If the craft were to approach Sapar at the easily set angle of 45 degrees to the Ararat meridian, its path would take it safely between these two hazardous areas. Moreover, coming in to land at such an angle, it would cross in the south over the rocky tip of Arabia while at a high altitude and start its glide over the waters of the Persian Gulf. Coming and going, the craft would have an unobstructed field of vision and of communication with mission control at Nippur. And Lil's lieutenant would then make a rough sketch, a triangle of waters and mountains on each side, pointing like an arrow towards Sapar. An X would mark Nippur in the center, figure 131. And here down below we have that figure where X marked the spot between the mountains. Incredible as it may seem, this sketch was not made by us. The design was drawn on a ceramic object unearthed at Susa in a stratum dated to about 3200 BC. It brings to mind the planisphere that described the flight path and procedures, which was based on 45-degree segments. The establishment of settlements on Earth by the Nephilim was not a hit or miss effort. All the alternatives were studied, all the resources evaluated, all the hazards taken into account. Moreover, the settlement plan itself was carefully mapped out so that each site fit into the final pattern, whose purpose was to outline the landing path to Sapar. No one has previously attempted to see a master plan in the scattered Sumerian settlements, but if we look at the first 7 cities ever established, we find that Bad Tabara, Shuruppak, and Nippur lay on a line running precisely at 45-degree angle to the Ararat meridian, and that line crossed the meridian exactly at Sapar. The other 2 cities whose sites are known, Eridu and Larsa, also lay on another straight line that crossed the first line and the Ararat meridian, also at Sapar. Excuse me. Taking our cue from the ancient sketch, which made Nippur the center of a circle, and drawing concentric circles from Nippur through the various cities, we find that another ancient Sumerian town, Lagash, was located exactly on one of these circles, on a line equidistant from the 45-degree line, like the Eridu Larsa Sapar line. The location of Lagash mirrors that of Larsa, though the site of Larak, or seeing the bright halo, remains unknown. The logical site for it would be at point 5, since there logically was a city of the gods there, completing the string of cities on the central flight path at intervals of 6 Baru, Bad Tibira, Shuruppak, Nippur, Larak, and Sapar in figure 132, the next page. The 2 outside lines flanking the central line, running through Nippur, lay 6 degrees on each side of it. Acting as southwest and northeast outlines of the central flight path. Appropriately, the name La Arsa meant seeing the red light, and La Agash meant seeing the halo at 6. The cities along each line were indeed 6 Baru, approximately 60 kilometers or 37 miles from each other. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. So here at the top right of the key, we got numbers 1 to 7, starting with Eridu, Larsa, Nippur, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sapar, Shuruppak, and Lagash. And here, if I can get it on scene. And I'm gonna let you guys see that for a minute while I get something to drink. Excuse me. This, we believe, was the master plan of the Nephilim. Excuse me. Having selected the best location for their spaceport, Sapar, they laid out the other settlements in a pattern outlining the vital flight path to it. In the center, they placed Nippur, where the bond in heaven-earth was located. Neither the original cities of the gods nor their remains can ever be seen by man again. They were all destroyed by the deluge that later swept over earth, but we can learn much about them because it was the sacred duty of Mesopotamian kings continuously to rebuild these sacred precincts in exactly the same spot and according to the original plans. The rebuilders stressed their scrupulous adherence to the original plans in their dedication inscriptions, as this one uncovered by Layard and stated, "The everlasting ground plan, that which for the future the construction determined, I have followed. It is one which bears the drawings from the olden times and the writing of the upper heaven. If Lagash, as we suggest, was one of the cities that served as a landing beacon, then much of the information provided by Gudea in the 3rd millennium BC makes sense. He wrote that when Ninurta instructed him to rebuild the sacred precinct, an accompanying god gave him the architectural plans, drawn on a stone tablet, and the goddess, who had traveled between heaven and earth in her chamber, showed him a celestial map and instructed him on the astronomical alignments of the structure. In addition to the divine blackbird, the god's terrible eye, the great beam that subdues the world to its power, and the world controller, whose sound could reverberate all over, were installed in the sacred precinct. Finally, when the structure was complete, the emblem of Utu was raised upon it, facing toward the rising place of Utu, toward the spaceport at Sapar. All these beaming objects were important to the spaceport's operation, for Utu himself came forth joyfully to inspect the installations when completed. Early Sumerian depictions frequently show massive structures built in earliest times of reeds and wood, standing in fields among grazing cattle. The current assumption that these were stables for cattle is contradicted by the pillars that are invariably shown protruding from the roofs of such structures in figure 133a is the next page. The pillar's purpose, as one can see, was to support one or more pairs of rings, whose function is unstated. But although these structures were erected in the fields, one must question whether they were built to shelter cattle. The Sumerian pictographs in figure 133b depict the word dur or tur, meaning abode or gathering place, by drawings that undoubtedly represent the same structure shown on the cylinder seals, but they make clear that the main feature of the structure was not the huts, but the antenna tower. Similar pillars with rings were posted at temple entrances within the sacred precincts of the gods, and not only out in the countryside in figures 133c. And all this is going to be on the next page, so I hope everyone's following along so we don't have to go back and forth. Were these objects antennas attached to broadcasting equipment? Were the pairs of rings radar emitters placed in the fields to guide incoming shuttlecraft? Were the eye-like pillars scanning devices the all-seeing eyes of the gods of which many texts have spoken? We know that the equipment to which these various devices were connected was portable, for some Sumerian seals depict box-like divine objects being transported by boat or mounted on pack animals which carried the objects further inland once the boats had docked in Figure 134. These black boxes, when we see what they looked like, bring to mind the Ark of the Covenant built by Moses under God's instructions. The chest was to be made of wood, overlaid with gold, both inside and outside. Two electricity conducting surfaces were insulated by the wood between them. A coppereth, also made of gold, was to be placed above the chest and held up by two cherubim cast of solid gold. The nature of the coppereth, meaning scholars speculate, which is covering, is not clear, but this verse from Exodus suggests its purpose. And I will address thee from above the coppereth, from between the two cherubim. Cherubim. Tomato. Alright, so here we're figures from top to bottom. We're looking at the figures. No, what was Sitchin? 133 A, B, and C. I'll go ahead and go over it again. So figure A up at the top was depictions. What we were told was for cattle, resting places for cattle. Figure B is for the where people got the depictions mixed up between antennas and pillars. And figure C was these quote-unquote pillars or huts. They were rings. Figure 134 all by itself, excuse me, is what, I don't know if you can tell, but right here above the bull, like always, is what Sitchin is trying to make a reference to the Ark of the Covenant. The implication that the Ark of the Covenant was principally a communications box electrically operated is enhanced by the instructions concerning its portability. It was to be carried by means of wooden staffs passed through 4 golden rings. No one was to touch the chest proper, and when one Israelite did touch it, he was killed instantly, as if by a charge of high voltage electricity. Such apparently supernatural equipment, which made it possible to communicate with the deity through the deity was physically somewhere else, became objects of veneration, sacred cult symbols. Temples at Lagash, Ur, Mari, and other ancient sites included among their devotional objects idols. The most outstanding example was found at an eye temple at Tal Brak in northwestern Mesopotamia. This 4th millennium temple was so named not only because hundreds of eye symbols were unearthed there, but mainly because the temple's inner sanctum had only one altar on which a huge stone double eye symbol was displayed in figure 135, the next page. In all probability, it was a simulation of the actual divine object, Ninurta's terrible eye, or the one at Enlil's mission control center at Nippur, about which the ancient scribe reported, "His raised eye scans the land, his raised beam searches the land." The flat plain of Mesopotamia necessitated It seems the artificial raising of platforms on which the space-related equipment was to be placed. Text and pictorial depictions leave no doubt that the structures ranged from the earliest field huts to the later stage platforms, reached by staircases and sloped ramps that led from a broad lower stage to a narrower upper one, and so on. At the top of the ziggurat, an actual residence for the god was built, surrounded by a flat, walled courtyard to house his bird and weapons. A ziggurat depicted on a cylinder sill not only shows the customary stage upon stage construction, it also has two ring antennas whose height appears to have equaled three stages in figure 136. Marduk claimed that the ziggurat and temple compound at Babylon, the Esagil, had been built under his own instructions, also in accordance with the writing of Upper Heaven, a tablet known as the Smith Tablet, after its decipherer, analyzed by Andre Perrot in Ziggurats et Tour hang on, de Babel, established that the seven-stage ziggurat was a perfect square, with the first stage or base having sides of 15 gar each. So up the top is figures 135 and 136. And that is Sitchin making throwing it out there about the discovered eye symbols at these ziggurats. Okay. Um, each successive stage was smaller in area and in height, except the last stage, the god's residence, which was of a greater height. The total height, however, was again equal to 15 gar, so that the complete structure was not only a perfect square, but a perfect cube as well. The gar employed in these measurements was equivalent to 12 short cubits, approximately 6 meters or 20 feet. Two scholars, H. G. Wood and L. C. Stecchini, have shown that the Sumerian sexagesimal base, the number 60, determined all the primary measurements of Mesopotamian ziggurats. Thus, each side measured 3 by 60 cubits at its base, and the total was 60 gar in figure 137. What factor determined the height of each stage? Stecchini discovered that if he multiplied the height of the first stage, which was 5.5 gar, by double cubits, the result was 33, or the approximate latitude of Babylon, 32.5 degrees north. Similarly calculated, the second stage raised the angle of observation to 51 degrees, and each of the succeeding 4 stages raised it by another 6 degrees. The seventh stage thus stood atop a platform raised to 75 degrees above the horizon at Babylon's geographic latitude. This final stage added 15 degrees, letting the observer look straight up at a 90-degree angle. Stecchini concluded that each stage acted like a stage of an astronomical observatory, with a predetermined elevation relative to the arc of the sky. So here at the top, figure 137, Sitchin was just talking about if you remember earlier in the chapter, the Sumerian sexagesimal base number system and their whole king's list and everything with the numbers and stuff, and showing us how it breaks down what they meant. 15, you see the 15, which was a fraction of 30, 30 off of 60, and so on. Figures 138 at the bottom, he was talking about okay, we haven't gotten to that point yet. So I'm going to have to go back. There may, of course, have been more hidden considerations in these measurements. While the elevation of 33 degrees was not too accurate for Babylon, it was precise for Sapar. Was there a relationship between the 6-degree elevation at each of 4 stages and the 6 Beru distances between the cities of the gods? Were the 7 stages somehow related to the location of the first 7 settlements or to Earth's position as the 7th planet? G. Martini in Astron I can't even pronounce that. Showed how these features of the ziggurat suited it for celestial observations, and that the topmost stage of the Isagila was oriented toward the planet Shupa, which we have identified as Pluto, and the constellation Aries in figures 138. Okay, so that's what he was talking about on this figure. How they built stuff, ziggurats, pyramids, to monitor certain celestials. And this ziggurat here was to monitor Shupa or Pluto and the constellation Aries. But were the ziggurats raised solely to observe the stars and planets, or were they also meant to serve the spacecraft of the Nephilim? All the ziggurats were oriented so that their corners pointed exactly north, south, east, and west. As a result, their sides ran precisely at 45-degree angles to the 4 cardinal directions. This meant that a space shuttle coming in for a landing could follow certain sides of the ziggurat exactly along the flight path and reach Sapar without difficulty. The Akkadian and Babylonian name for these structures, Zukiratu, connoted tube of divine spirit. Excuse me. The Sumerians called the ziggurats Esh. The term denoted supreme or most high, as indeed these structures were. It could also denote a numerical entity relating to the measuring aspect of the ziggurats. And it also meant a heat source, fire, in Akkadian and Hebrew. Even scholars who have approached the subject without our space interpretation could not escape the conclusion that the ziggurats had some purpose other than to make the god's abode a high-rise building. Samuel N. Kramer summed up the scholastic consensus. The ziggurat, the stage tower, which became the hallmark of Mesopotamian temple architecture, was intended to serve as a connecting link, both real and symbolic, between the gods in heaven and the mortals on earth. We have shown, however, that the true function of these structures was to connect the gods in heaven with the gods, not the mortals on earth. And that's going to do the ending of chapter 10, Cities of the Gods, and Zecharia Sitchin's The 12th Planet. I want to thank you all for being a part of here. And just most especially just offering me your time, your ears, your patience. Thank you all. Once again, I appreciate every single one of you. Stay safe, remain calm wherever you find yourselves on Mother Earth. Bye.